Welcome to the Longevity Optimization Podcast, where we discuss longevity, optimal health, nutrition, peak performance, cognitive excellence, and so much more. Dr. Maloof, it is such a pleasure to have you here with me today.
It's such an honor to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited. We've already had, we've done a whole podcast basically.
Pretty much in the last 30 minutes.
So many good topics, but we're going to get to repeat them all and talk about new topics. So I'm so excited. So a little background on Dr. Maloof. So Dr. Molly Maloof has dedicated her medical practice to health optimization and personalized medicine since 2011 and has worked with high-achieving entrepreneurs, investors, and technology executives in Silicon Valley, as well as Academy Award winners in LA. Since 2012, she has worked as an advisor or consultant for over 50 companies in the digital health, consumer health, and biotechnology industries. She published The Spark Factor, which I ordered today. The Spark Factor, the first book on biohacking for women. I love that. With Harper Wave Books in January 2023, she taught a pioneering course on healthspan extension in the wellness department of the medical school at Stanford University for 3 years before launching her own company, Adamo Bioscience. The vision of her company is to demonstrate that love is embodied medicine that enhances longevity and awakens a healthier, happier, and more resilient world where intimacy is the undisputed force for human flourishing. Dr. Maloof is on the frontier of personalized medicine, digital health technologies, biofeedback-assisted lifestyle interventions, psychedelic medicine, sexual wellness, and the science-backed wellness products and services. Love it all. Thank you for doing that.
It's been a fun career so far.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So I'm so excited to talk all things female health today.
Totally.
So we were talking before the podcast, just about the massive hole that is female health right now. And you've already done so much. So I read your bio, but just kind of walk us through.
Sure. Well, I've always wanted to be a doctor since I was a child. I got to medicine. Medical school was tough. I was really struggling at one point. I almost quit. And I ended up going to a psychologist and he was like, "You are not depressed, Molly. You're a stressed out medical school student who's not taking care of herself." So that's when I really started changing my lifestyle. I started doing yoga, meditation, stopped drinking cups of espresso. I started eating regular meals. I stopped eating garbage for cereal for meals. Started exercising and my grades went up. My brain improved. My test scores changed. My reports from physicians that I was working with were improving. And I just had greater capacity. And I was like, what is going on here? And I ended up getting a 99th percentile on my second board exam. My first board exam was an average. So my peers were like, "Did you cheat? What did you do?" And I was like, "No, guys, just changed my lifestyle." And that's when a light bulb went off. And I said to myself, "Oh my God, there's something more that we're not being taught in school." It's there's something about lifestyle that's changing my health, and somehow changing my health is changing my performance. And I just wanted to understand why. And so I ended up creating the first course on evidence-based lifestyle medicine as a medical student. Fast forward, get to residency, it's impossible to be healthy as a resident. So I ended up going halfway through my residency, dropped out, got my medical license anyway through a loophole, started working at Silicon Valley, working with investors, executives, and entrepreneurs because I wanted to build a practice around health optimization. So somehow I got people to pay me for this. And while I was building a practice, I was working with startups because I was trying to fund my own startup of me. Mm-hmm. And I started working with companies that needed help with product development or clinical research or scientific marketing. So I ended up working with 50 companies in the last decade. And around 2017, started my own personal brand. And eventually during the pandemic, I was like, you know what? I really need to write a book. I really need to take what I've learned working with all these executives and get this out to the world. Mm-hmm. At that time, I'd been teaching at Stanford for 3 years, which was wild because I didn't even get into Stanford. Mm-hmm. For medical school or residency or even undergrad. So getting to teach there was I think honestly a testament to me optimizing my own health literally revealed hidden capacities in my own brain that I didn't even know I had. So the last decade of my life has been about optimizing my personal health and the health of my clients and trying to understand what health is on a first principles level. And it led me to researching mitochondrial health. That led me to understanding energy metabolism, which is a foundation of what I believe health is about in this modern age. And that also led me to, I was teaching at Stanford and I was teaching this course on relationships. And it hit me another light bulb, another big wake up moment. I was like, oh my God, loneliness is worse for your health than smoking, drinking, sedentary behavior, and obesity. And then close personal relationships that are healthy is better for your health than like any factor we've ever found. I was like, what am I missing here? Like, how is this a thing? Like, what is this about? So I got obsessed with the science of love. I ended up, creating a company called Adamo Bioscience, which means Adamo means to fall in love in Latin. And as I was studying the science of love, I discovered 3 human drives. There was the drive to have sex, the sex drive, the drive to fall in love, the romantic love drive, and the drive to attach. And I learned this through Helen Fisher, who's like she actually studied Match.com's data set for years. She's a brilliant scientist. And so I was like, wow, I could like build an entire career around the science of love. So what am I going to do first? Well, there was very few companies in sexual wellness. And I was like, you know what? This seems like something I could like to innovate in. So my company just developed the first sex therapy since Masters and Johnson. And we ran our first study on it. And there are technically some like sexual sex therapies out there. But as far as I can tell from the literature, like we have with our first clinical study shown we have the best study demonstrating results in sexual satisfaction, sexual communication, emotional closeness, which is a surrogate marker of love. And what we're really aiming to do is basically help with this really big epidemic of sexual dysfunction in women and frankly, a lot of dissatisfied sex and female populations, which I think is highly related to the culture of porn. So we're really trying to like innovate in the area of sexual wellness. I still run a medical practice. My medical practice still works with executives and investors at top tech companies. And then the last piece is just working on my brand, coming to podcasts like this and trying to spread sort of this message that like health is a science and we can really optimize our health and we can live a flourishing life if we know what it's about.
Well, I love all of that. And I can't wait to get into, the protocol that you did for the study because that's super exciting. And I want to get into also, why do you think women are so dissatisfied with their intimate relationship?
If you actually look at where we're getting our education, believe it or not, a lot of people are getting their education from porn. Mm-hmm. And so we're not really being taught in grade school and high school. We shouldn't be taught in grade school, but in high school or college, we're not taught about consent. We're not taught about what does it mean to even have a healthy sex life? What does pleasure mean? How do we achieve healthy sexual pleasure? It's kind of always like, don't have sex, wear condoms, avoid STIs. If you have sex, it's dangerous. And we're not really, even if you are, let's say you are saving yourself for marriage, where do you learn about how to have healthy penetrative sex? Like you go to, like, honestly, where do you go? I don't know, because everything I learned honestly was through porn. And so I kind of feel like we have these models that there was an article in the New York Times a few weeks ago about teenagers, like the number of young women that have admitted to having asphyxiation during sex. And it's actually, some people are even having brain damage because of this. Like it is a problem. Like the state of sexual health and education in our country is a problem. And I feel like because of that, a lot of people are engaged in friction-based experiences that can be painful. Men are not properly educated on foreplay, and you don't even really see it a lot in pornography. So as a result, like we have a really, unfortunately, like it's a taboo area of life. Masters and Johnson were pioneering sexual research in the 60s, and then Kinsey came along. And if you actually study these two groups of people, the examples of people that were teaching us about sex were not particularly good examples of how to behave in society. So we don't have a lot of good role models, frankly. And that's a problem,
Yeah.
There's just, I think Gwyneth Paltrow's done a lot of good things for sex education herself, but I think we need to make sexual wellness as important to our overall health as our sleep, our circadian rhythms, our spending time in nature, our diet, and our exercise. And it just isn't seen that way right now. It's sexual health is seen as there's either a problem or we don't talk about it.
That's a great point. I kind of come from an interesting perspective because my husband and I did wait until marriage to have sex. And I think, and you can definitely correct me because we did not talk about this before, but I think that the lack of intimacy or trust could also, because sex with my husband is so amazing and so, pleasurable because I love him so much.
Yes.
Is this science?
Well, this
backed?
is a huge, huge piece. So lack of intimacy, like this is a total generalization, just so you know, but in general, men seek intimacy through physical connection and women seek intimacy through emotional connection. It's a huge generalization, not always true for everybody. But if you ask most men and women, you'll find out that like for a lot of men, like they really want that physical experience. For a lot of women, to get to that place, they need to feel emotionally connected. And so if a man is rushing into the act of penetration, where's the space for a woman to feel safe, to open up? Where's the place for her to feel safe, to let go and surrender? It's just not there. So I do really believe, and part of the reason why we have a big part of our method is psychosexual development. It's like getting to know yourself sexually and being able to share that with your partner is a very intimate experience before you even have sex. Talking about how you feel about your body, talking about how you feel about your desires, your fantasies. A lot of people can't even talk about sex with their partner. And so that's a big place of emotional intimacy. It's like, I want to be vulnerable with you. Like, this is the thing that makes me excited. And this is what turns me on. And it can be really scary for people to go to those places.
Yeah. I'm just curious. Is there data around having sexual relations within like a committed relationship versus, because I feel like, and maybe this is a generalization, but I feel like we are promoting more like sex in general, like it's becoming more acceptable, right?
Well,
like
Sex in the City culture, right? It's
that, I've never talked about this before on a podcast, but like OnlyFans, like,
oh, I know,
just like the normalization. But I'm wondering,
and the monetization.
If for women, I can't imagine that that's not like leading to worse outcomes.
I mean, I was just on a panel last week at a psychedelic conference with a woman who helps very disenfranchised populations in San Francisco deal with sexual trauma. And these are OnlyFans stars. These are prostitutes. These are people that have had, basically when she talks to them, she basically says like almost all of them have had major trauma. And so the big thing that we're not talking about as well is like this epidemic of sexual trauma, especially 1 in 4 girls are abused as children. And that's contributing to a lot of this, in my opinion, this behavior, which is like, I'm not going to say that OnlyFans is a bad place and it's a bad thing for people to go make money around sex. But I do think that like the real question is like, is this where we want society to go? Is this like a wholesome direction for the American society? Like the decline of the family is like a big issue in my opinion. And I think that arguably, if we really were to really reemphasize like the importance of that primary relational bond and that primary family structure, we might have a very different world, I'm not going to say that like it's right for everybody, because I have a lot of friends that are divorced and have beautiful blended families. But like, I think we really need to ask ourselves, like, what's going on in our country right now with sex? What's really happening right here? And I think that there's something to be said about like the importance of healing your software before you get into a relationship, really working on your relationship to yourself, working on the challenges you had with your parents growing up, because that really does create a foundation for how you relate intimately to your partner.
I mean, absolutely. That was a big thing that I said when we were just chatting, I knew, because I didn't have like the most perfect, and we don't even need to get on to it on this podcast, but I knew that I had to fix my brain first, like the software, like how I thought, because I always say, when people say like, how do you find, the partner you're looking for? I always say, well, and Jordan B. Peterson actually said this first, you have to become the person that who you want is looking for.
Yes.
Right. So like I spent so much time developing myself and working on myself so that I could present my future husband, whom I now have, like the absolute best version of me. And that's always still a work in progress, like communication styles and all that. Like it's something you have to continue working on. But
yeah, I agree.
I mean, I'm so removed, to be honest, like, because most of the people that I know, well, I guess maybe 50% of people, like, I feel like the male, we'll just call it biohacking industry, is very like lone wolf. I mean, just because the people that we know are at the top, they're not married or in relationships. So I feel like that's also contributing maybe to the idea that marriage is, I don't know, it's such an interesting topic.
Yeah.
But you can probably tell me more on it. But I know from personal experience, like getting married was, I would say the best health optimization tool ever, or best biohack of my whole life, because I was doing everything right. Like I had the most disciplined routine. hour routine in the morning, every single gadget you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
I own a longevity clinic. I have access to hyperbaric. I was doing NAD IVs, the whole 9 yards. Every single biomarker, thousands and thousands. I've had the AI soft plaque analysis. I do that every single year. The Grail liquid biopsy, I was doing that years ago.
Yeah.
I was doing all that stuff, but the big component that was missing was like someone that I could really love, really trust.
Yes.
And I think there's some science too. I've just kind of been getting into it, but around the nervous systems. Nervous system things? I would love it. Yeah.
So I was just giving a talk on stress today. And one of the things that people don't realize is that your brain, if it's not sent signals for safety, it's on the unsafe switch. So believe it or not, like living alone and being by yourself is really not great for your mental health, because your brain senses lack of connection is like, I'm not safe. Your brain senses connection to others, feeling connected to a partner or a family or a community. That is actually one of the primary sources of safety that we have in our brain. But it all depends on the quality of those relationships. So having high quality, healthy relationships, you get when you touch someone that you love, and when you're connected to someone that you love, you get more oxytocin. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone of safety, trust, and love. Women are more oxytocin dominant. Men are more vasopressin dominant. Vasopressin is the hormone of defense, aggression, and protection. So a woman being partnered with a man who makes her feel safe is actually, her nervous system can relax into that sense of devotion, into that sense of love and connection. And essentially, a lot of the research, even for men, is like there was an 80-year study on men. And it was basically it was at Harvard, and it demonstrated at the beginning of men's life, they thought that what would bring them real fulfillment and well-being was fame and fortune. But at the end of their life, they unanimously would say it was close personal relationships. So qualitatively and quantitatively on a cellular level, and even in observational research, it shows that high quality social relationships is the greatest factor in longevity and happiness. So why are we not optimizing this? Like, why is this not more important to us? Like, why are we putting so much time and effort into our careers and into our biohacks and into our even me, I was doing the exact same thing you were doing. And I was like, oh my God, this is the serious holy grail of health. And we are not even talking about it. And I think women and women biohackers have a great opportunity to spread this message, because women are really designed to love. Like, we're designed to create life. We're designed to nurture life and connect life. And so we're just better at it.
I agree. And, there's so much pressure, I think, from society now that, you have to like become so successful. And look, I mean, we both, a lot of people would say that we're doing really well in our careers. And look, I did derive joy from building businesses, but it is really nothing in comparison to like building an amazing marriage or whatever that looks like for you, because you're creating something like, I'm going to get to bring new life into the world with this man. Like, that is just, it's so exciting. And I don't know all the studies yet on like, I know some of the data on marriages and things of that nature, but I'm just excited because I don't really feel like there's enough voices either just talking about this. Like, what's the data on having these relationships? Because you can take all the perfect supplements, you can eat a perfect diet, you can do everything, you can work out, but and like, you tell me more about this. If you aren't secure and have happiness, that stuff is doing maybe a tiny bit, but not that much, right? Because you're still going to be unhealthy.
I can tell you that from my clinical practice, I have seen time and time again clients of mine where I'm doing everything to optimize them. And I'm like, what am I missing here? And in this one, there was this one investor I was working with. Everything he was doing was right in his health. And he just was not flourishing. And I was like, what is it? And it was clear that it was his relationship. And I think the problem that I see in society is we are sent messages like optimize your nutrition, lose weight, take the supplements, go work out, get that gym membership, make sure you optimize your sleep. But where are people going to like, where do I work on my relationship, right? How do I work on my relationship? I went to this Tony Robbins relationship seminar for platinum partners I got invited to. I'm not a platinum partner, but my boyfriend was at the time. And it was our second date, which is really funny. And I basically went to this seminar and I was like, this is like some of the most valuable information I have like ever seen presented. And Tony asks at one point, how many people have read a book or two on relationships in the last year? And only like 5 people in the whole room of like 500 people raised their hand. Like, so many people who are just like not reading about relationships are not just not even thinking about relationships and optimizing relationships. So it's like, where do you even begin? And one of the things that we wanted to focus on was like sexual dysfunction in particular, because we felt like, okay, where are the programs available for couples that are having challenges in their sex life? And really sexual wellness is what we're calling it. Like, how do you optimize your sex life and your relationship in a way that will actually meet the needs for both men and women? So our method and our protocol really is designed around, fundamentally, we were trying to design a method around love. So I wanted to create an actual method that would actually improve sexuality, love, and attachment. We ran our study on committed partners because it was our first program. We didn't want to like kind of risk running it on just a general population.
Yeah.
So we were like, the safest thing for us to do is to work with committed partners. So we didn't actually see improvements in attachment or commitment because the partners were already committed and attached. But we did see statistically significant improvements in sexual satisfaction, in sexual dysfunction, and then we were working on a generally healthy population, so it was more on sexual satisfaction than dysfunction. But the next thing we're going to try to do is run a dysfunctional population, and we also saw statistically significant improvements in emotional closeness, which is a scientific way to measure love. It's used through you take two different circles. One's representing you and your partner, and how much they overlap over time is kind of like a measure of like how much you're feeling emotionally close. And then passionate and intimacy. So like we actually technically did develop a protocol around love. And it's about not only physical intimacy, but emotional intimacy. And sexual communication improved, duration of sex improved, frequency of sex improved. And I'm like, man, I feel like every marriage, like somewhere between 10 and 20% of marriages are sexless.
Wow.
And like, we want to stop that. We really believe that sexual health is a big part of having healthy relationships over time. And it's a prioritization thing. Like a lot of people they start having kids, they deprioritize sex and intimacy. And one of the things that my parents taught me was like, their relationship came first, and then their relationship with us was second.
Yeah.
A lot of parents put their children first, and they just stop taking care of their relationship. And then the kids take priority, and then the relationship declines. And I think that's a real shame, and it doesn't have to be the case.
Yeah. I mean, even prior to my husband and I getting married, we talked about this. And I mean, we both are completely on the same page that him and I go before the children. We want to have a lot of kids. We want to have like 6 kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. We want to have a big family.
Wow.
Yeah. He's one of 6. I grew up as one of 5 for
I'm one of 5 too.
Yeah, the majority of my life. I'm not the whole time because my mom was remarried, but we want to have a big family, but we always know that at the end of the day, it's always going to be him first for me and vice versa. And I think that is, it's another big area that if you continue to prioritize your spouse, and this is just all like basically anecdotal and what I've learned from
me too,
life experience, but I think, the outcome of the family is going to be better. The outcome of the relationship is going to be better.
And the outcome of the children is going to be better.
Oh, of course.
And the structure of that family is going to last longer. And then there's the grandmother effect, which is like, if you have these beautiful children and then they have kids and you're in their lives, like you're more likely to live longer and they're more likely to be healthier. So there's a lot of evidence that like having like the science of love is basically, okay, there's a sex drive that drives you to find a partner, have sex with them. Then when you have sex with someone that you love consistently, or when you have sex with someone consistently, you typically will fall in love. And also you can fall in love without even ever having sex. But the more that you have sex with your partner, the more likely you are to reproduce, the more likely you are to create an attachment bond. And those attachment bonds are really important for that child to stay alive. Like we evolved this as an evolutionary system in order to perpetuate the species. So this is core human programming. If you get it right, you're more likely to live as long as possible. And like, this is a secret I'm trying to explain to people. Like the biggest hack in life is like, have healthy relationships. Yet, where are we taught about this in school? Why is this not part of college? Like, why is this not part of like biohacking or the health and wellness movement? It's like you typically people are going to therapists when there's a problem. Where do you go when you want to have optimal relationship health, optimal, sexual health?
Yeah. So what did you do in the study? Like what was
we ran this program. The funniest thing about this program is like, I started working with this couple that had started dating maybe 6 months prior to me hiring both of them to work on this method. And they were basically like madly in love by the time they started working with me. And this couple is Erin Michael and Seda Desolé. And I would argue that like Sayeda is probably like the world's best expert in psychosexual health. And Erin, I think, is the world's best expert in somatic sexual health. So what I hired them to do is to create a psychosexual somatic therapy, a therapy that would address the psychological relationship to sex and partnership, as well as the somatic relationship. So like what is actually happening during sex. So as it turns out, most modern sexual medicine is about psychology. It doesn't even address the physiology. So we were going very deep into the anatomy of human pleasure and how to actually create the conditions where both partners have optimal sexual pleasure and optimal sexual health, as well as optimal sexual optimal relationship to their own individual sexual selves. So Sayeda taught me this concept of erotic individuation and sexual sovereignty. And a big piece of our method, aside from this, like developing this relationship to what turns you on in your own relationship to sex as an individual, is like, what is embodied consent? And how do you embody consent in your relationship? Which I've met plenty of married people who like have experiences of non-consensual sex. And non-consensual sex is a huge issue in our society. And part of the problem is that we weren't taught about consent properly in school. And so how do you actually signal to a partner that you want what you're going to receive? And then how do you learn how to attune yourself to your partner? How do you become an active receiver? How do you bring a person into you? And then as a giver, how do you be able to be an adaptive giver? How do you actually observe your partner and say, oh, do they want this? Do they not want this? So we have an 8-week program, and it addresses the psychosexual facets of health as well as the somatic facets of health. And you get the content released in a video format online. You get a questionnaire to begin with to actually assess your psychosexual health. And then you go through this with your partner week by week. And our method, we did have integration sessions during our first study, which were mostly people asking Erin and Sayeda questions, but there was no group therapy involved. So it was really designed to like help people have any questions with the method that they had, but it wasn't designed to be a group therapy. The next study we're going to run is going to be on a self-driven program that you get the content released week by week, and you can text our team questions, but it's going to be a little bit less of you having to show up every week to another webinar. You're going to be responsible for going through the content with your partner. We're going to release it week by week, and then you'll have 3 months to finish the method. And we think we're actually going to get even better results because, to be entirely honest, we were actually launching the program as we were finishing editing the program like a typical startup. And we were launching a clinical study at the same time. So the fact that I was not expecting the results we got. I was like, there's no way we're going to get anything statistically significant. We're just going to do a feasibility study, and that's going to be the primary outcomes. Is this even a feasible thing to deliver in a digital format? So when we got these secondary endpoints that were all off the charts, I was like, how did we do this? This program, like everybody said the first 4 weeks were too slow and the last 4 weeks were too fast. So we're going to actually adjust the timing, and I think we're going to end up with even better results. And we're going to continue to run data collection as we launch this program to a broader audience.
Amazing. Well, we'll definitely include information on the program and everything we are doing with that. Because yeah, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some other reasons that women, may have less sexual desire. So what about the interplay between hormones?
Oh yeah.
And women? Just talk to me about that.
I mean, women go through hormonal changes throughout their lives. Especially pregnancy is a big change for a lot of women. So that can really challenge postpartum. Postpartum sex can be really challenging for some women because they're so depleted. So like metabolic health is so important for good hormone health. And a lot of women are dealing with, lots of psychological stress that's not being properly addressed in their life. And that sends a signal to the cell that you're not safe. If your cells believe that you're in an unsafe environment, they're going to prioritize cortisol production over sex hormone production. So you start seeing PMS and PMDD. There's so many hormone disruptors in the environment today. I've seen testosterone deficiency in 20-somethings. Like it's wild, like that young women are having problems with their hormones.
Do you think that is related to birth control, or do we think that's like just endocrine disruptors?
I mean, birth control 100% can affect a woman's sex drive. I remember being on birth control and like in my 20s, and I was like, it just flattened my effect, and I went off of it and I was like, whoa, it's like a roller coaster every month. And then eventually I got my hormones balanced by myself. But let alone, I mean, I do think birth control has a lot of impacts, but even for women that aren't on birth control, there's so much. I mean, fundamentally, our water supplies are not particularly healthy. There's a lot of hormones in the water supply. There's a lot of hormone mimicking substances in our beauty products. So like cleaning up your beauty regimen is so important, let alone the epidemic of metabolic syndrome in women, which we know has effects on energy. And so insulin resistance, 1 in 3 women have 1 in 3 people have prediabetes. That is going to affect your capacity to have that energy and that vitality to even want to have sex. As women get older and start going through perimenopause in their 40s, your progesterone levels can drop. That creates estrogen and progesterone imbalances that can totally affect your sex drive. Totally not talked about enough. And then when you hit menopause, if you can't take hormones or you choose not to take hormones, say goodbye to your sex drive. I mean, it doesn't happen to everybody, but it is a huge, huge problem. Like your sex hormones are a big reason why you have a sex drive. So I think that we're going to experience a huge boom in like hormone optimization programs that are digital programs online. I worked at a company that did this. It was very bespoke, very high end. It was really hard to scale, but we have AI now. We have better compounding pharmacies available. We have Zapier connecting all these little digital health tools. So I think the future is really bright for women, but we're in an inflection point where we know we need to start putting more money into these problem spaces. I have so many women coming to me being like, I can't find a doctor to prescribe me hormones. The Women's Health Initiative created an entire movement of doctors being like, oh, hormones cause cancer, don't touch them. And it's like, okay, we have blood biopsy, we have liquid biopsies now, we have MRIs, like we have a lot more knowledge about how to prevent breast cancer than we've ever had. And honestly, for me, it's a conversation with women about risk factors. Like, do you have the BRCA gene? Are you at high risk for ovarian cancer or breast cancer? You know, can you do things like, intravaginal hormones instead of oral or topical hormones? There's a lot more options available. And then you have women like Suzanne Summers, who kind of led the charge. She's like, you know what? I had breast cancer and I'm still using hormones. And that woman looks amazing in her 90s. Like, I'm of the kind of band camp that like, you have to look at a person as an individual. You have to figure out what the risk factors are. And then for me, I don't have a risk factor of heart disease, but dementia runs in my family. And so I'm way more worried about becoming demented than I am about cancer. And it's a balance. And you have to ask yourself, like, what am I willing to risk? Like, I am way more interested in health span than longevity. Like, I believe health span is the path to longevity, but I'm going to be using hormones when I hit, 50.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, as will I. Can you talk a little bit about this study that really scared everyone and what went wrong?
Yeah.
There? Thank you.
I mean, the Women's Health Initiative was done on a large population of nurses, and it was done over many years. They basically gave women hormones that were already past menopause. That was one of the first problems, is they'd already been through the change completely, and then they started hormones. Whereas nowadays, women are starting hormones earlier. So what we're learning now is like women are starting hormonal replacement as the hormones are starting to change. And that wasn't the case then. It was like women had already gone through hormone deficiency. And then they were using this hormone called Premarin, which was like horse urine-based progesterone. And we have much better products today available that are more bioidentical, that are more, they look more natural to the human body. They resemble our natural steroids. So, it was a more rudimentary approach to hormone replacement. It was a totally different era. And so a lot of people don't really believe the results are necessarily, they're necessarily reliable. And that's not to say that if you have the BRCA gene, you have a family history of breast cancer, and you're high risk for ovarian cancer, that you might want to be more careful and cautious with how you approach hormone replacement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's such a bummer though, because it really created a ton of fear. And it's unfortunate because, I mean, just knowing what I know about hormone therapy, and we offer it at my clinic, and the results that I see women have, I mean, it's just like, of course I'm going to do that when I get to that point in my life. Of course I'm going to do everything to optimize my hormones now, but when I get to that place in life, I mean, that is, health span extension. Yeah. So that's super exciting. Can you walk us through, because something that I feel, I mean, every woman has a menstrual cycle, right? Like in an entire phase that's 28 days long, typically between 20, but many of us don't know what that looks like. Can you
Totally.
like walk us through the phases and
Yeah.
what hormones are doing during each one of these phases?
Sure. So you have your menstrual phase, and then you have your follicular phase, your ovulatory phase, and your luteal phase. And typically when you're in your follicular phase, it's like right after your period, you're feeling amazing. Your estrogen's starting to rise. Your progesterone is semi-high, but it's not as high as it is during your luteal phase. And you're very insulin sensitive. So you can eat carbs and you can run fast and you feel like you're on top of the world. And then you hit your ovulation and you feel hot. You're ready to present that presentation. Like you look in the mirror, like, wow, I look really good today. And you're hornier because you've released an egg, right? You've got your LH spike and you've released this egg. And then if you get fertilized, then you get pregnant. But if you don't get fertilized, the corpus luteum of that egg starts releasing progesterone. So you start to see your progesterone rise. Your progesterone starts rising higher. So you end up feeling, generally speaking, most women feel a little bit more tired near the end of their luteal phase. It's natural to want to go more inward. It's natural to kind of be a little bit more relaxed. One of my employees was like doing a workout the day before her period. And I was like, I don't think we should be doing HIIT training right now. Like the day before your period, you should be doing kind of more gentle exercise. And she overslept her call the next day. And I was like, remember when I told you no more HIIT before your period? And then your menstrual cycle starts. Your kind of lowest hormone phase, right at the very beginning of that. And you're actually more similar to a male hormone. So it turns out that like near the end of your menstrual cycle, you can actually perform quite well in physical activities. But I generally see most women during the first couple of days of their menstrual cycle want to kind of take it easy. And some women really struggle with pain and whatnot during their menstrual cycle. And then you head into the follicular phase again. And then that's when you're ready to like kind of go to town and put yourself out there again. So yeah, it's like a really fun thing to read about in my book, actually.
I love that. So day one is when you start your period.
Yeah.
And then what after that, then that's like about 5 to 7 days, right?
Yeah.
And then we go into, so that's like, let's just say day 5 through 7 will be your next phase.
Yeah.
And
really, so it's day 7 to 14 is your follicular, or whatever, 5 to 7 to 14.
Yeah.
And then typically around day 14 is when you ovulate.
Yeah.
And then you have another week or so of your luteal phase, and then you start heading into your period. So it really changes per women. I really recommend tracking this. I recommend the Oura Ring with natural cycles. I also recommend, I still track with Clue, even though I use the other ones, just because I've been doing it forever and I like to count my days and see. Because like I've actually noticed as I hit 40, like I went from a 5-day cycle to a 4-day cycle. I went from like, I'm still 27 to 28 days, but it's like, I still have it's more like 4.5 days now. So it's kind of interesting to just see things change over time. And honestly, things only really get thrown off for me when I'm highly stressed out.
No, absolutely. I use Oura Ring and natural cycles and I love it. And I think it's such a great tool too, because it's so educational.
Yeah.
It explains where you're at in your cycle and ways, just has so much education in there. I really love it. Like tons of stuff. So highly recommend that. And
so many fertility trackers on Instagram right now. I found like there's like one that measures your menstrual secretions.
Wow.
Yeah. It's crazy.
How is it doing that?
I don't know. I need to go look into it, honestly. I'm doing a big research. I'm doing like a massive amount of research on fertility.
I love that.
I'm like planning to have kids in the next few years. And the last few partners, I'm really grateful I did not have children with them, but they were all interested in having kids. And I just haven't been quite certain of the guy, but I definitely feel like one of those like intuitive knowings, like I know children are coming. And so I'm kind of preparing my body for it now. And I'm just fascinated by how much better research there is now on how a woman, even later in life, can get pregnant. Like my therapist is 47, had a beautiful child. So like, yes, you're a geriatric pregnancy, but if you take really good care of yourself, like it's totally possible to have kids in your 40s.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm 33 and I did like as part of I wanted to know all these things on my own. Yeah. So we actually went to Cedars-Sinai, and I will say I've been preparing for babies for the last 10 years. So
I
would
say I have 2 with my lifestyle.
Yeah, exactly. And the lifestyle is just so huge. Like I have the best toxic burden we've ever seen. I have one of the best gut tests that Genova has ever seen, which is, I'll have to share. We'll have to look at my data because I'm so excited. We might work together on the protocol. But fertility is such an interesting thing, and it's so sad because the numbers are just really frightening, right? And
Well, I mean, fertility is declining for sure,
yeah,
but it doesn't have to.
yeah,
And a lot of it, I mean, your eggs and your ovaries have so many mitochondria. If you optimize your mitochondrial health and you really look at your metabolism and your nutrition and your toxic markers, you can do a lot to really preserve that. Like my AMH levels are quite good for someone who's 40.
Mhm.
Like I'm pretty happy with them. Now they have gone down since 2020, but it's 2024.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I have to like kind of keep an eye on this now. Like this is a thing that you got to be aware of. And, you know, there's a great company called Gyna, and they have a beautiful program on just like educating bite-sized pieces about what does it take to be super fertile. And a lot of women are not eating enough protein. I mean, I dated a guy who I mean, this is a great example of like, it's very possible to be in a relationship where you really love someone, but they're actually not great for your health. And, I was not eating enough protein, and I really saw my muscles wasting away and my hair was falling out. And he was a vegetarian and he really didn't want to eat protein in the house. He didn't want to eat meat. And I'm not saying you have to be a meat eater, but you do have to optimize your protein levels to be able to like literally build a human body.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. I think, so long story short, my AMH levels are about that of a 20-year-old.
Nice.
Yeah, I had ovarian ultrasound.
Yeah.
And I have 27 follicles.
Wow.
0 markers of anything PCOS related. So that is super exciting.
Yeah.
That's great. My husband has also like peak fertility because when we met, so funny story, like when we met, I actually asked him for his labs. So he sent me all of the labs that he had, and then I sent him a bunch more labs. Like I sent him a gut test, total toxic burden test, a bunch of other labs, had him do them, and then I looked at them because health is such a big part of my life, right?
Yeah.
Like I could never have married someone that like wasn't interested in health because it would be a mismatch.
Yeah.
But he's obsessed with it, super, excited about it. So that's amazing. But it's just so sad because you have to do so much more work now to eat a healthy diet.
Yeah.
Costs a lot of money.
Yep.
I am crazy when it comes to my products. Everything's like all natural, no fragrances.
Do you have this on your website?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, great.
I have a bunch of stuff. I mean, I love the resource, like the environmental working group.
Same.
That's like where I started like learning about this stuff originally. Cleaning products, I don't touch them. Even the ones that we have are all like supernatural.
Yeah.
Very like 2-3 ingredients. But you have to work so hard and you have to spend so much time figuring out like candles. Like I don't have candles.
Beeswax only.
All of this stuff.
Beeswax
like
is the only candle that cleans the air.
But fragrance in general, like you cannot trust this. So there's new companies now that are coming out that are good. That if you want fragrance, I think there's a couple brands on the market that you can use.
Michelle Pfeiffer has a beautiful perfume company that's clean.
Yeah, Henry Rose. Yeah, right.
I wear Queens and Roses. Queens and Monsters.
Yeah. So there are options, but it's just I think that the stats are in place. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think fertility has been decreasing at about 1% per year over the course of the last at least 30 years. But so 1% a year doesn't sound like a lot, but when you look at that as 30% decrease or 50% decrease, that's massive.
It's scary. And we live in a really toxic environment, like it's sad, but people have no idea how much they're poisoning themselves with consumerism. And like, don't get me wrong, I love products. People send me products all the time, but you have to work against the curve. You actually have to like work against the current of like big companies trying to sell you garbage. I mean, I go to a Walgreens, I go to like a big box grocery store, and I'm like horrified that people don't realize how much poison is in these stores.
Oh my gosh.
Like
I don't even go into these stores.
I mean, I like to get an idea of what's going on in the world. And I'm like, I find it to be like almost like a cultural exploration of like, what exactly are people doing to themselves? And like Walgreens, it's like a drugstore, right? And it's like almost everything in there is designed to poison you.
Oh my God.
I mean, the cosmetics, the beauty products, the bath products, like all these industrialized products, let alone the food, the processed food, like most of the pharmaceuticals. It's like, it's a joke. And then you go to like a French or a German drugstore and you're like, whoa, I can touch everything here. Like, and you go to a grocery store and like France, everything is real food. It's like food. It's like actual ingredients. Like, oh my God, I remember when I went to St. Bart's for the first time. This is going to sound so bougie, but I went to St. Bart's and I'm like, this is an island country and how are the groceries this good? And I'm like, oh, it's France. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, there's different
They just have
regulations.
different culture around food products, right? Like,
and there's more regulation.
way more
There's
regulation.
no regulation here. And it's like, it's so sad because again, it's like so difficult to eat healthy food. I mean, I have not eaten like a piece of inorganic food in over 10 years, and I don't eat anything packaged because it's just loaded with, it's just junk, it's processed seed oils, and it's in plastic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, but that's like the common thread of like everyday life for so many people.
I mean, so I was in the Bay Area for like almost a decade, and then the pandemic hits, and I spent some time with my family in the Midwest because I was like, you know what, this is a great opportunity. My landlord sold my apartment, so I was like, you know, I'm gonna nomad it. And I first went to Maui, then I went to Brentwood. LA got a little unsafe, so I was like, you know, I'm gonna go see my parents in the Midwest. My parents have a few homes, so I borrowed one of their houses because they weren't using it. And so I'm hanging out in the Midwest with my sister Maddie. And I'm like dating a guy down the street from my parents. I met this guy in my parents' neighborhood. And this is like quite a fun experience at the time. But I remember being like, oh my God, I'm in like a complete food desert. I'm living in Peoria, Illinois, this quintessential American town. And I start breaking my rules because I'm like, okay, I'm going to just test. Is everything I've been doing for so long, does this actually necessary? Like, am I drinking, like, because I actually felt like my family was like, Molly, you are drinking Kool-Aid. Like, what is wrong with you? Like, why are you so obsessed with this stuff? So I start bending my rules because my environment changes. The people I spend time with change. My relationships changed. My environment changed. And my habits changed. Because I was like, you know, I'm living in the Midwest. Like, let's see what happens. If I like, do I really need to be doing everything so rigidly? I gained 10 pounds. I got SIBO. My skin started to break out. Like, all these things went wrong. And I was like, okay, clearly this is not working for me. So of course, after it was like maybe, I think it was like Wisconsin and Illinois and then partially in Florida. And then it was like a little bit more time in Illinois. And then I was like, you know what? I'm done. I'm going back to California. And I just like picked up and left, broke up with the guy. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't eat this way anymore. Like, this is not working for me. And I really don't think people understand that, like, it's not just about your individual decisions. It's like, where do you live? What's available to you? What's in your environment? What's happening in the air quality where you live? What's in the water where you live? And like, I moved to Jackson recently, Jackson, Wyoming, and people are like, why are you living in the mountains? I'm like, honestly, I have glacial water coming out of a spring that feeds me, and I shower in it, and my skin feels incredible. I'm hunting and fishing. I'm eating like literally wild elk. I live in an elk refuge. I'm going to fish like cold water fish that has no mercury. My friend has a vertical farm, and I'm getting incredibly fresh vegetables from like literally this farm in the middle of Pinedale. And I do eat some nuts and seeds and legumes and grains, not very much, but some of those. And I source them very carefully. And I've never eaten more. I mean, it's like the cleanest of the clean I've eaten. And I just feel like I'm thriving. And it's like, that is not available to most people. Okay. This is not, but this is like the closest you can get to like primitive eating, right? Like, this is what you would get if you were like living in the end. Like, I'm also foraging. I love foraging. I started foraging in the pandemic. I love wild foods. When you eat wild plants, you get xenohermesis. You get literally plants that are stressed make you stronger. People think plants are poisoning you. Plants are designed to make you healthier. Like, this whole plants are poisoning you movement. I'm sorry. I'm over it. Like, but a lot of people who struggle with like eating plants is like they're eating pesticide-laden foods. They're eating glyphosate. They've damaged their guts through too many antibiotics. And the reason why they can only eat meat is because the landscape of their gut is garbage. And so that's all they can digest. So I have a real question for our country, which is, why are we not putting more money into changing food policy? Because it should not be this hard to eat healthy. We should be subsidizing fruits and vegetables. We should be funding vertical farms in every city to provide enough fruits and vegetables for everyone. Like, why we're feeding people corn and soybeans and derivatives to animals is beyond my comprehension, because it's clearly poisoning people, and yet it's still considered normal.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. And that's such a big topic. I've thought about it so much too, but it's just like so difficult to change because big food and big pharma, and they're in bed together, and it's like, it's this system. So it's like, you have to take control of your own health. You have to do the research, or, you know, find people to trust and listen to. But in terms of diet, as it's very controversial.
Oh yeah.
What do you think the optimal diet for most females?
Well, okay, I'm just going to speak to my own experience as someone who grew up in like the Midwest and really felt like her diet as a child, even though my parents really tried. They had 5 kids. The house was filled with processed foods. You know, my mom cooked every night, but we still had a lot of junk food around. And I really suffered as a kid because I had a lot of antibiotics as a child because I was born with like a emergency C-section birth. So I had antibiotics up the wazoo as a baby. And I had pneumonia and I had sore throat. So I really got a bad gut to begin with because of my upbringing, unfortunately. It wasn't my parents' fault. It happened. But I remember thinking, there's someday I'm going to figure out my body. Someday I'm going to understand this. And so for a long time as an adult, because I was borderline pre-diabetic in my 30s, I really thought that, I couldn't eat, I really thought that because I was borderline pre-diabetic and I had celiac. And so I knew that I had to be careful with my diet. So I went pretty autoimmune paleo for a long time. And I thought that was the best diet for me. And in some cases, I still think it is. But surprisingly, I was dating this guy and I went on like a vegetarian diet. And I was like, I'm definitely going to die on this diet. This is terrible for me. But I surprisingly, my gut was actually in pretty darn good shape, eating nuts and seeds and legumes and grains, but not a ton of them. But I definitely ate more of them. But I also he had a chef. So I spoke to the chef and I was like, you must prepare these traditionally. And then I ate tons and tons of vegetables. I would say that diet wasn't terrible for me, but I was not enough protein because I was losing my hair and I was losing my muscle tone. I was kind of getting really skinny, which is great. But I really think that the truth is that it wasn't like I was failing on that diet, but it just wasn't fully optimal for my body. I do think that you can, and I have friends that are big biohackers and they are just thriving on their vegetarian vegan diets, but they know how to optimize their macros and their micros. If you measure you get a NutriVal test, you can look at your micronutrients and macronutrients, you can see, and you actually get your blood test. You can see are my lipids healthy? Is my glucose healthy? Do I have enough amino acids? I can actually see that on labs through measuring your NMR lipoprotein profile for your lipids, as well as your fasting insulin, hemoglobin A1C, and fasting glucose, and blood sugar monitor for your blood sugar. So I had a client who was eating paleo, low carb, and their lipids were out of control, but their blood sugar was low. And I was like, we need to tune this. So I was like, we're going to up your carbs, we're going to lower your fat, and magically his labs start to improve. Also seeing this in women, where a lot of women and a lot of people are basically been told, including for me for a while, I was pretty darn low carb. But if you eat too low carb for too long, what can happen is you become metabolically inflexible to carbs. So you have lower insulin levels. And so you're more insulin resistant because your body is physiologically insulin resistant it's designed to do that, because if you eat high fat, your body is saying, okay, I don't really need to release a ton of insulin here, but I also need, if I get any glucose, I need to make sure I can preserve that for my brain. So I don't think people get it. If you stick on either end of the spectrum, you eat high carb all the time and low fat, you may be more insulin sensitive, but you might have a higher insulin output. So what I am trying to do with people is tune their body to their labs. So to their diet to their labs. So if I see a person is too low carb for too long and their lipids are out of control, we lower their fats and we raise their carbs. We raise the healthy carbs. If I see someone is eating vegetarian and they're deficient in all their amino acids on a NutriVal, then I raise their protein levels. So you can actually do this empirically, but what is the best diet for a woman most days? It really depends on both your body type and your ethnicity. And for example, one of my employees is Dutch, and she does not do well with lots of red meat and lots of dark meat. Dutch people thrive on fish and dairy and grains. It just works for their diet, and she's super healthy. So I like to look at labs. I like to look at genetics. I like the company My Gene Food. It's a great company for Americans who have lots of weird genetics. It's a really nice, helpful tool for trying to tune your diet to your genes. And I like to kind of approach it from a personalized standpoint. I look at a person's blood sugar monitor. If they're eating lots of refined carbs and lots of sugar and I'm seeing spikes all day long, of course, I've actually noticed this. it doesn't really matter to me, like if you're eating paleo or vegetarian, I see everyone spiking on sugar and refined carbs. So you really got to watch the flours, the potato chips, the pastas. You can't eat a giant plate of pasta, people. Like, you're going to spike. So you have to, I love the Glucose Goddess's book. We at one point were roommates. Oh, really? Yeah, she's a friend. But like, you gotta, it's like, it's really not as simple as like, I mean, I would just start with this. Eat whole foods, not too much, eat till 80% full, avoid processed foods unless they have very few ingredients. Like, I do like certain processed foods, but in general, I try to avoid them. But I'll eat like kale chips. I'll eat, sometimes I do some crackers, but like generally speaking, not in big quantities of them. And then, you know, I like soaked and sprouted nuts. That can be time consuming unless you have a dehydrator. I make my own kale chips a lot. I like to make my own processed foods, honestly. Like, it's a lot of effort, but I do think that like if you can really cook for yourself with ingredients, that's the first step. And then you can use your labs to kind of tune your diet. So like if you see your lipids are out of control, you can actually cut back on your saturated fat. I have ApoE4, so I really can't do large quantities of saturated fat. If you see your blood sugar is really high, yeah, you're going to have to look at your carb intake, you know? And then you can look at, you know, your iron levels, for example. Like if I see a person's got really screwed up, what was really funny is when I was vegetarian, my iron levels actually improved. And I think it's because my microbiome improved. So I was eating like over 40 different types of plants a week, over 50 types of plants a week. And I really think that a diet filled with lots and lots of produce and lots of diversity is a foundation. And then you have to get enough protein for your needs. And I am kind of a believer that like you can cycle in and out of higher and lower protein. Like there's some benefits to occasionally limiting the protein. It's kind of like fasting. Like protein restriction can be like a fast. It sends signals to your cells. Oh my God, where's the protein? I need to go out and kill an animal, you know? Yeah. So how do I simplify this for people? Whole foods, lots of diversity of the diet. I mean, I can optimize every single one of these. Like if you're going to eat plants, do you have autoimmunity? Do you need to watch for lectins, oxalates? Do you have kidney stones? Obviously no oxalates for you. Do you have sensitivities to nightshades? Do you have sensitivities to eggs, to dairy? Like I think everybody should just try an elimination diet once, because a lot of people have untreated food intolerances, which is usually due to gut dysfunction. So in my practice, we run labs first and foremost, and then we make changes to nutrition. But for most people, it's kind of like start with whole foods, eliminate fast foods or processed foods, get super hydrated, get enough lean protein, watch your, I mean, truth be told, most Americans are over consuming saturated fat. There is a problem, like even French people only consume 15% of their diet as saturated fat. So like our culture of just saturated fat up the wazoo isn't great for metabolic health. Doesn't mean it's bad for you. It just means don't overconsume it. Like don't overconsume anything, right? Yeah. Don't overconsume protein. Don't overconsume fat. Don't overconsume refined carbs in particular and sugar. Get enough fiber. You need about 20 grams of fiber a day. Try to limit your sugar intake. They say less than 25 grams of sugar a day. It's actually sounds so complicated when I explain it, but yeah, it does take some effort to like hone and personalize your nutrition. I do think that there are people that are thriving on vegetarian diets. There are people that are thriving on paleo diets. And yeah, there are people thriving on carnivore diets, and like more power to you. I've seen some really healthy looking labs in carnivores, but I worry about their gut health long term. I do. I think you need to ask yourself, like we need more studies on gut health and carnivore diets. So yeah, that's the kind of approach that I take is like data driven, personalized. We should really turn this into a protocol for people.
I know.
You know?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I recently read a study on basically female exercise duration versus male duration. And in this study, and you can tell me if you agree with it, it was moderate aerobic exercise. And both males and females, I think, plateaued at like 300 minutes per week, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the benefits started to just like either decrease or not increase.
Sure.
But it looked like women only needed about 140 to get about the same reduced risk of all-cause mortality as men at the 300-minute mark for men, 140 for women.
That makes so much sense in terms of like evolutionary biology, if you think about it, because women were kind of designed to like go and forage in their little area. And then men were like, let's go hunt. And that hunting could require like a lot more work. So, I mean, look, I'm a huntress, and yet I also a gatherer. So like, who really knows what happened in primitive times? Like if men or women were both doing these things. But generally speaking, like women have a responsibility of like rearing children, and that's energetically taxing. So I do think that this is a really fascinating study. I mean, I think it's interesting that men need more exercise than women to actually get the main benefits. The research that I've done basically describes for longevity benefits, there's kind of like a U-shaped, or like there's like a bell curve. It's like, it's really bad to not exercise, but it's also really bad to over-exercise. And so if you do over 90 minutes of high intensity exercise a week, which is like berries and whatnot, like that actually can damage mitochondrial health. So I think what I at least read was that like there's pretty much no limit to moderate intensity exercise. I'm talking like, moderate to low intensity, like walking and whatnot. You can pretty much do that for as long as you want and not really hurt yourself. But it's really the high intensity stuff that becomes really damaging to health. So for women out there, like don't over exercise, but also don't under exercise. Like there's a lot of sedentary people, and also just sitting all day long can negate that workout you did at the gym. So you really do need to move your body and get up and get that standing desk and like move around, because that non-exercise activity thermogenesis is where you get a lot of the biggest benefits for just general health. And like you need to do things like, sprinting on occasion and weight training. Like those are great for building muscle and bone density. But I think that at least in LA, where everyone's exercising all the time, there is a risk of women actually harming themselves from too much. And all those athletes too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in particular, it's immune system problems. So what you typically see with people who are over-exercising is they get immune system dysregulation from too much cortisol, not enough recovery.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, it's been such a pleasure. I mean, we'll definitely do a part 2 here soon. And I know we'll have to put together some protocols for women, because we both really have the same mission. We just want to make life easier for women and help them optimize their health.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
This podcast is for informational purposes only, and views expressed on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Kayla Barnes, does not accept responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of the information contained herein. Opinions of their guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.